Not in the least. Not in the least. I was in a really bad mood to begin with because I had to stay and take care of the kids. That wasn't part of my reality back then, and I was in a bad mood all day. And Jan waltzes in with this glow on, this like just looked fantastic, and she's just in a really good mood, and she starts telling me in one way or another, I don't remember the exact words, she starts telling me that we really don't have any problems. It's just thought. And I'm like, oh, really? I mean, truthfully, we were really in a mess, and there's a lot to that. I mean, I grew up in a home full of dysfunction and alcoholism and sometimes violence. I was the oldest of 11 kids, had a big guilt thing about not being able to stop the violence when it occurred. And like Jan said, when we first met, I was coming out of that, and finding understanding the principles of falling in love are very similar. Like when you fall in love, you don't really care about the details about the person, like if they hang their socks on the doorknob or whatever. You don't care about that. You just want to be close to that soul. And so all that judgment kind of goes, it's gone, right? You just want to be. And it's like when you find the principles and you start to see psychological innocence in people, same thing. You just fall in love with people. So it was very similar. And we had our first 2 or 3 years of our marriage were fantastic, actually. I forgot my depression. I forgot all that stuff. I didn't think about it. We just had a really good time. But slowly it began to seep back into my state of mind, right? And the search didn't help, as Jan said. We were searching through Zen Buddhism and pop psychology and just anything we could get our hands on in those days. And truthfully, at some level, I know I was just looking for relief, some kind of relief from the insecurity and stress and depression that I lived in 24/7, right? And so it seeped so far into our marriage that we got to a point we literally couldn't be in a room without arguing, right? And meanwhile, we're holding our heads up like we're really wise. We go to the Zendo and all this kind of stuff, And it was like we were living in a really strange illusion, really, And as Jan said, when I first heard about Sid, I totally dismissed it. It's like, really? A welder on Salt Spring? Has he been to Tibet? Has he been to India? Has he studied with a Japanese master? Has he read this? Has he read that? And apparently the answers were no on all of those. And so for me, it was not acceptable. It couldn't be real. There's no way, right? And so Jan comes in after this accidental visit with Sid, and she's trying to tell me something. She's trying to get something across. And to be honest, I just started another argument. And I got really upset, and I don't want to hear this so-and-so stuff, and I got really fired up. But what I remember most about that first incident was this moment when I just saw Jan. I don't know even how to explain it. She just wasn't going to be part of it. I got her for a moment, when I started in on it. I could see her getting a little bit upset, and then she just stopped. I could just see that she was going somewhere else and that she wasn't going to be a part of it. And that really ticked me off. Like when we have an argument, I want to argue, right? And I can't remember what you did. You might have just got a cup of tea or went for a walk, but I was on my own, right? And so for the next little while, I did my best to bring Jan back where I knew her. I would start arguments. I would throw out things I knew would upset her. And sometimes it would catch her. But I'd always see that moment when I'm not going to play, like in the kindest way. I mean, sometimes she would just ignore me and just say, would you like a cup of tea? I'm like, no, I want to argue. And over several times in that first couple of weeks, I saw that moment when Jan just, I could just see her not going there. But what I also saw that was really disturbing was that she was really happy. I could see her enjoying my son. Who was very young at the time, like 3 or 4. I could see her enjoying her friends. And at first I wanted to tell myself it was a put on, it's a show, it's a delusion. I remember waking up after that first day when Jan came home and she was in the kitchen, she was singing. And my first thought was, there's no singing in my house. Like, what the hell is this? So I did my best, I did my best. But in the end, what got me looking at this was the fact that Jan's change was real, that it was sustained. And part of me just knew that was true. I could see that there was a real change there. And that brought in just a half an ounce of curiosity. But that curiosity is a really healthy thing, even if it is only a half an ounce, because it starts you looking in another direction. And it brings an element of hope into your thinking. And that's what happened. I just started to look at it very cautiously, like, okay, what is this? Right? And then I'll tell this part shortly, because there's two insights I had in those early days that set us up for our life. And the first one was like, I had an insight, but I didn't get it, because what it was the couple that Jan had been traveling with and met Sid. I was really put out with them for putting this in her head, right? But I started to notice this change. And one morning, I think it was a Saturday morning or a Sunday morning, we were having coffee and it just popped out of my mouth. I'll change their names to protect the guilty, but it just popped in my mouth. I want to go talk to Bob and Betty. And Jan said, oh, really? And I'm sure Jan was thinking, oh, he finally wants to learn something, right? But what I was thinking, honestly, was I was in a bad mood. I'm going to tell these people to butt out of my life. I don't want to hear any more of this, So Jan doesn't know this, and she calls them. They invite us over for coffee. We go over to their house, and Jan's like thrilled all the way, and I'm, grouchy old self. And we walked in the house, and the gentleman led Jan into the living room and sat down. And I was going to do the same thing, but I turned around and the woman had 2 cups of coffee, and she was sitting on the table like I'm going to sit with her. And I'm thinking, I don't want to talk to you, And I had some modicum of politeness in me, so I sat down. And it just came out of me. Like, actually, she sat down. She said, "What's on your mind, Chip?" That was a big mistake. It was a really big mistake. What's on my mind? And I started going on about how simplistic this all was. And I finally blurted out this statement that you need to butt out of my marriage and stop talking to my wife about our marriage. And she looked at me as clear as can be and said, I have never had a single conversation ever with Jan about your marriage. And see, I knew she was telling me the truth. I just knew, So it kind of took the wind out of my sails. But at that moment, I looked over her shoulder and I saw Jan. This feeling, this whoosh, rushed in, this amazing feeling of emotion. And I just did my best to deny it, And actually, I stood up and said, this is a bunch of blah, 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 and walked out, and got in my truck. And I'm sure Jan apologized profusely for my behavior. They came out to the truck. And on the way home, I kept having this really weird thought. I kept thinking, you're busted, man. I knew I'd seen something, but I just wanted to deny it, right? And I did my best to deny it. But I kept listening. I finally heard Sid a couple of times. I heard him actually speak. And what was really weird in that first 3 or 4 weeks is our marriage changed completely. It just changed. It just went from hell to just having a good time with each other, just enjoying life, right? And it was so strange because I couldn't see, well, I don't do this anymore, and we won't say that. It wasn't anything like that. It just changed, right? And then I forget how long after, I had this second insight, which really was the one that changed my life, right? I was sitting on the couch one morning, early morning, and Jan was on the floor playing with our little son. And it was really early, and the light from the window was coming in at a really steep angle, and it was shining in their hair. And caught my attention. And I looked at them, and that feeling just rushed in again. Incredible feeling of emotion and love. This time I knew what it was. I not intellectually, I just knew. I knew I was seeing a truer reality when I looked at them. All of the past, all of our arguments, all of that stuff we've been living in just disappeared for a split second. Right? And I saw them. And when I saw them, it filled me. Right? And I knew I was seeing a truer reality. And then I knew that whatever this guy was talking about was the truth. And literally everything in our life changed after that. Absolutely everything. The insight that Jan had, she was with Sid, and that insight set us up for the next 50 years, basically. It changed everything. And it continues to teach us. Right? Like there's these mornings when I get up and I walk through the living room, Jan's already up and I don't even see her, and I start making coffee, and then that feeling comes again, and I glance and I remember that feeling, of knowing that I have the privilege of seeing the true reality whenever I want to. I have the privilege of having that within me, that was a gift that I was shown, that there is a truer reality. And it's accessible to everybody on the planet.
I know it's just about time for our scheduled break, but I wanted to share that I think a big kind of a inflection point, I guess you could call it, when we were going through all this was one day. I remember shortly after I'd heard Sid, and Chip was still not there yet. I look back, I think it was like a glass between us where he could see me happy on the other side, and he didn't know how to get that feeling. And I knew that at the time, but I didn't realize right away that I was waiting for Chip to get this. I was waiting. And one day, the way it hit me was one day I was looking at Chip and I was seeing that he was still unhappy and trying to figure this all out. And it just out of nowhere, I just thought, oh my gosh, like I've been waiting for him to get this. Like how silly is that? Because the whole point is we already have it, all of us. That's who we really are, is that beautiful true self that's inside everybody, that innocence and that beauty and that health. And I thought, it just looked to me all of a sudden so absurd that I would be looking at Chip with anything else than that, knowing that that's who he is too. And so when I was looking at him and I was seeing the outward signs of stress and worry, somehow that dissolved in front of my eyes, and I just saw it. I just saw Chip's face when we first met, and that carefree, and then it went back to just I just saw in the moment that he was struggling, but it just showed me that, oh my gosh, what I heard in my head was this: he doesn't have to change. He's absolutely beautiful. And I saw that he was absolutely beautiful. And that was such a huge thing for me and for both of us, because the reason I'm sharing this is because so many times people say they wish that someone in their life that is struggling would get this, would listen to the principles, or would listen to it and hear it, and it's so it's such a universal reaction, right, when you get it yourself. But when you just really trust that you get it for yourself, and that's all you have to do, the rest will just automatically happen in its own time. And we can't predict anyone else's path or how long they take. But you can just look after your own experience.
Yeah. But Jan looking after her own experience was what gave me a chance. Right? It's funny, like when Jan talks about how she saw that day, she didn't say anything, but I felt it. I felt her just not trying to convince me anymore, not worrying about me. I felt it somehow, you know. And on the one hand, I remember feeling like even more alone, you know. But on the other hand, it just left it wide open for me to just see for myself. And that was truly a blessing. So that whole thing about trying to help somebody else is like, if you live it, that's what changed me, was that Jan was living it. I could see the living of it showed me the possibility, the living of it.
And then that's the way we are now in our relationship, is that sometimes I'm not seeing it and you're seeing it. And so that helps me, that you just, maybe I say something that is off track or judgmental or whatever about something, and you just stand your ground, and I feel that wisdom. And so it goes back and forth. That's the beauty of it.
Yeah. But it does go back and forth. It's we've learned to leave each other alone in certain states of mind, you know, because you know that true self is there. You don't have to worry about it. It'll come back. It'll come back. It always comes back. Well, folks, I think that might be a good time for a break. And so nice to be with you all.
Oh, it's wonderful. Just seeing everyone's face is just such a treat for us, honestly.